This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Wednesday evening. It's February 7th, and we have a trade to get to. The Wolves acquired Monte Morris. I've been told it's Monte, not Monty. They acquired Monte Morris for Shake Milton, Troy Brown Jr., and the Wolves' 2030 second-round pick. The plan for today's show is to get to know who Monte Morris is as a basketball player. To do that, we're bringing on Ryan Blackburn, who covers the Denver Nuggets for Mile High Sports. Ryan covered Monte in Denver. Monte was there from 2017 to 2022. I just finished recording that conversation, and he was great. It's just really stole his backlog of memory from having covered Morris there. It's just like 25 minutes of information dump into our ears, mine included, about just who Morris was in Denver. We really tried to focus 2021-22 season when Morris started 74 games in place of the injured Jamal Murray that season. That was the year the Nuggets were the 6th seed, even though they didn't have Murray or Porter Jr. Morris was in the starting lineup. It's the year Jokic won his first MVP. So we're going to get into that. I haven't been able to watch a lot of Morris. We're recording this about an hour or so after the news broke, but we're just trying to get to know who Morris is as a player, and Ryan does a great job of bringing that for us. What I want to do first quickly is to just sort of wrap up where this leaves the Wolves' assets and kind of where they sit from a roster construction standpoint, again, as of Wednesday evening after the Morris trade. So quickly, let's hit on the money of the deal. Nothing too crazy here, and probably most importantly, nothing long-term committed to Morris, right? To match the salaries in the trade, the Wolves sent out 2 expiring contracts of Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. Milton was on a 1-year, $5 million contract, and Brown Jr. was on a 1-year, $4 million contract. So that's $9 million going out to Detroit, and in return, the Wolves take back Morris on a 1-year, $8 million contract, which means an extra $800K coming back to the Wolves. And this is really only relevant in that the Wolves are very close to the luxury tax line. Before the trade, they were at $2.36 million in space below the tax. And now with that $800K, they're $1.56 million below the tax. We don't, expect the Wolves to make any moves that send them into the tax this season, because we know they will be in the tax next season, and we know they want to delay those repeater tax penalties. So what does this mean? Well, it means the Wolves could still take back more money in a subsequent trade, tomorrow on deadline day, so long as it's less than $1.56 million coming back in excess money in that deal. For example, the Wolves could trade Kyle Anderson and his $9.2 million contract for Alec Burks's $10.5 million contract, and still have, even though, Burks is making 1.3 extra than Kyle, the Wolves would still be able to fit that in and have about, $250K of breathing room below the tax line. But probably more realistic than that random example I pulled out is it gives the Wolves a little bit of flexibility in the buyout market, or they still maintain the flexibility they had. Or if the Wolves are going to sign a player on the buyout market, they're going to sign them for a prorated minimum contract. Minimum contract's about $2 million, half the season. The cap hit on that would be about $1 million. So again, with 1.6 million in space below the tax, they can still sign a buyout guy to round out the roster. They have an extra roster spot open now too. So I would assume they will be looking to do that, and they're not in a complicated tax situation where they need to make some sort of move to create space. All right, so that's the money. The Wolves trade their own 2030 second-round pick for Morris in this deal, which means they still have 3 seconds left that they could trade. To correct myself, sorry, last week when we did the trade deadline preview, I said the Wolves only had 3 second-round picks that they could trade. Again, that really nice Memphis second in this upcoming draft, the 2024 draft. They have Utah's 2025 second. And then in 2026, they have the least favorable of Indiana, Miami, and San Antonio seconds, which that's a not great second to have there. But what I forgot when we were doing the deadline preview before is that they can trade. I just didn't count correctly. They can trade a second all the way 7 years out, which means they could trade their own 2030 pick. That's what they ended up putting in this deal. So long story short, the Wolves still have, they entered the deadline with 4 seconds that they could trade, which means they still have 3 left to work with after trading that 21. It doesn't mean they will trade those picks. There's real value in that 2024, this coming summer's Memphis second that they have. They could use that pick themselves to draft a young player on a cheap second round contract. They could also pair that pick, that Memphis pick, which will be like 36, with their own first round pick, which will be like, 27 or something like that. Maybe that's a way to move up in the draft, or maybe on draft night, once you can trade that 2024 first, right? You can't trade it now, but you will be on draft night. It's a pretty decent asset package to be able to put out there, like the 27th pick and the 30th pick. If they just want to go, make a trade for some sort of veteran player. They don't need, what I'm trying to say is they don't have to spend all of these second round picks right now, because, they're assets that they could trade later down the line or just use as picks as well. But for purposes, the trade deadline, the Wolves do still have 3 second round picks to work with in their bag of, tradable assets. The last thing I want to hit on solo is Monte Morris's future. Because this kind of seemed like a rental, right? We know the Wolves have all this tax stuff. They're really tight going forward, but this doesn't necessarily have to be a rental for the Wolves. Again, they're facing that big tax crunch this summer, so giving anyone a new contract at the end of this season comes with a real significant luxury tax cost. And Morris is going to need a new contract after this season. Again, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. But, here's the thing. If the Wolves didn't trade for Morris, they would have had no way to sign Morris this summer. The Wolves aren't going to have cap space, right? So they can't go out and sign a free agent that way. They're going to be limited to mostly rounding out the roster with minimum contracts, and you likely wouldn't be able to sign Morris for a minimum. But now that they have Morris on the roster, they have what's called his bird rights. We've talked about those before. And that having some players' bird rights allows you to re-sign your own free agent, even if you don't have any cap space. So they could bring back Morris now using those bird rights and sign him to some sort of contract. Again, the literal cost of that would be steep. It would rocket the Wolves even higher into the luxury tax next season, potentially making them exceed the second apron. But I don't think we talked about this enough. Like, what if Mike Conley doesn't re-sign with the Wolves? I'm not saying that's likely at all. He's probably back. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he signs a contract extension in the next week or so. But in theory, Conley could leave. He is an unrestricted free agent. And I don't think we talk enough about that unlikely proposition, because if Conley were to walk, what's the plan at point guard for the Wolves next season? Even if Conley walks, the Wolves are still well above the luxury tax line, which means replacing him in free agency would pretty much need to be a minimum contract. And running this team back next season, but replacing Mike Conley with a minimum contract point guard, that is a problem. Acquiring Morris, affords you a backup plan, or creates a backup plan for you. If Conley walks, then Morris could be brought back. And then, starting point guard, you're not like ecstatic, maybe necessarily, that Monte Morris becomes your starting point guard, but compared to the alternative, which might be a minimum contract player or needing to trade for somebody else of Morris's caliber, again, with limited assets, there's a value in being able to have Morris here now. And if you need to break glass in case of emergency, re-sign him if Morris is gone. I think it's a good piece of sort of risk mitigation from the Wolves front office. All right, that's the wrap on my notes from a roster construction standpoint on the Morris deal. Again, we're going to now talk with Ryan Blackburn about who Morris is as a player, or at least who Morris was in Denver 2 years ago when he played for Tim Connolly. Quick break, and we will bring Ryan in. Today's brought to you by Your Home Improvement Company. And again, if you're considering it, we're talking to you about Your Home Improvement Company. And if you have a home renovation project that you're considering, particularly if it's a bathroom or windows project that you have coming up, please do consider Your Home Improvement Company a company that supports the show. We'd love to support them with generating them some business. In February, they have a deal of 30% off all bathroom renovation projects. They can do the bathroom installations in a day. They are backed with warranties, and it is no money down, no interest, nothing until 2025. And same goes for their Windows deal, buy two, get two for February at Your Home Improvement Company. Again, if that's something you're considering, please do consider reaching out to Your Home Improvement Company for a consultation. That number is 844-270-7180, or you can go to yhic.com for, again, Your Home Improvement Company, where it's your home made better. And then today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. And we've been guests getting our one pick from everyone. We're going to put a slate together. We're all taking we're taking the Patrick Mahomes free square on 0.5 passing yards. I'm going to say more than that. Jace had Brock Purdy throwing more than 0.5 interceptions. So he says Purdy's going to throw a pick in this game. Chris took Isaiah Pacheco for more than 67.5 yards. And because everyone else's was more, I decided, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go for a less than their number. And while I could see Deebo Samuel being very involved in this game, his receiving yards total is 58.5. So I'm going to say Deebo Samuel has less than 58.5 rushing or receiving yards in the Super Bowl this coming Sunday. Again, we're just letting you know about this. Again, a fun little thing you can do when you're at your Super Bowl party or with your friends. Put $5 down. What is it on this one? If the Dane Jace pick hits here, that one would pay 10 to 1. So you put $5 down, you win 50. Maybe we'll add Kyle in there for another one too and juice it up even more. But that's prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app, and a $100 sign-up bonus if you use the promo code DANE. Let's bring in Ryan.
Hey, yeah.
All right, we are now joined by Ryan Blackburn of Mile High Sports. And you're thinking, Dane, what are you doing having a Denver Nuggets right on? Well, let me tell you, Monte Morris played for the Denver Nuggets and had his best season of his career in the 21-22 season, stepping in for Jamal Murray. And Ryan, as we were just kind of talking about before we hit record, like my process always of a new player that the Wolves sign in free agency or a trade or whatever is, we look at the numbers. We can do that. And then you try and watch the most recent a game or two or clips of those players. And we're in a unique situation with Monte Morris, where he's only played 6 games thus far this season, not a big role on that Detroit team. So the question I think that I'm trying to answer, and I would assume many of the listeners are too, is what does this player look like? What does this player look like when they are a good or best version of themselves? So I'm really curious to just talk to you about your experience of covering Monte Morris, the role he stepped into that season, and what his play look like. But first of all, hello, how are you? Hi, Ryan.
Hello. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. As always, I love the Dane Moore podcast. It's a classic in the feed that they always got to get to, especially with how awesome the T-Wolves have been this year, which is great. And now we're getting the hotel phone. I love it. That is so
it's
funny.
Chaos. It's chaos. I'm not cutting that out. I'm not. My intern here at the hotel in Milwaukee was acting up, and so I called down. Whatever.
I'm imagining that's Tim. That's Tim Connolly.
Yeah, he's calling my hotel room.
He couldn't record. He couldn't find the mobile, so he found the hotel. No, so I think it's always an interesting time around the trade deadline, and we've got so many connections between the Nuggets and the T-Wolves now, and like with Tim and now with Monte especially. Um, how I would describe Monte Morris is Mike Conley light,
Hmm.
which I think
Everyone's
T-Wolves,
like,
T-Wolves fans are like,
oh,
hell yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Uh, Monte Morris doesn't make mistakes. Monte Morris is a true professional. Monte Morris is like he has a nickname on Basketball Reference called the Count of Monte Assist to Turnover, which is hilarious. He has earned that nickname with the way that he's played, and his big claim to fame is that he can run your offense without making mistakes and put other people in a good place to succeed, which I think is something that the T-Wolves, especially on the bench, need desperately heading into a playoff run.
yeah, absolutely. And I went on Ryan's broader NBA pod, the Alley Oop last week, and we were kind of talking about this and the idea for the Wolves of what to get on the trade market in terms of backup point guard or bucket getter or shooter. Those, not that they can't still address those things. They still have some more assets. They have the buyout market too. Backup point guard was not at the top of my personal list. Doesn't mean it wasn't a need. And given the type of players sort of available for seconds that are backup point guards, I'm really excited about Monte Morris and who I understand him to be as a player, and to only come at the cost of that one pick. So that is extremely encouraging, I think, for Wolves fans to hear. Mike Conley light. That's what they're looking for here. And I'm curious of how you would describe that 21-22 season when he stepped in for Jamal Murray. And like, you guys maybe think kind of coming into that, like, what were your expectations of Monte Morris? Was it one of those guys where you're like, yeah, I actually think he's going to be fine in a starter role, which he obviously proved to be? Or are you kind of like, no, this is like a backup. They might need to address this.
Yeah, so for a long time, Denver had prided itself on having a great point guard rotation with Jamal Murray as the starter and Monte Morris as the backup, one of the stronger units for any team in a while. And Monte would always be able to come in off the bench and do the things you'd ask him to do from a backup role. And then that probably won't change in Minnesota here. As a starter during that stretch of time, he was pretty solid. He basically scaled what he was doing as a backup and wedged his game in around what Nikola Jokic does really well, around what Will Barton did really well, Aaron Gordon for that team. And Denver had to adapt on the fly because not only did they know going into it that they lost Jamal Murray, but 9 games in, they lost Michael Porter Jr. as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of nights where Monte Morris was the second best player on the team. Like there were, and he was doing a great job of setting the table for Nikola Jokic, for Aaron Gordon, for anybody else that was in that starting lineup. And were there problems? Yeah, he's not the best, most physical defender, and that's probably not changed ever since his time in Denver. And he also probably isn't as aggressive of a scorer off the dribble as you would hope from a point guard in today's modern NBA. But the thing is that he can do it. And having somebody who has the skill set and that is willing to take some of those, like even if it's just like a 16-foot jumper off of a pick and roll, like that is a skill set, especially in the playoffs, that every team needs.
Absolutely. I want to loop back to the defensive thing at the end. Long story short, I think the Wolves are in a unique position to be able to absorb and play a below average defender, as the numbers, as I was looking up before, grade Monte out to be. I think the Wolves can handle that. But for the 21-22 season, he plays 75 games, starts 74 of them, averages 20 points, 3 boards, and 4.4 assists. Again, kind of running through the numbers there. I was 39.5% from 3 on 314 attempts. That's really high volume. I actually looked it up. Anthony Edwards is 122 of 310 right now. 39.4%. I mean,
there you go.
Volume, obviously, because Ant's done it in 50 games. But
and by the way, the one number that I would point to is the 1 turnover per game that he averaged as a starting point guard, which
is
It's incredible. And the only way that the Nuggets were going to be able to survive that season was if they didn't shoot themselves in the foot. And Monte will not do that. For any team that he is on, Monte is going to make good decisions. He's going to be a smart basketball player, and he's going to set up the stars to succeed in whichever lineups that he's in. He can fit around other situations. He can be a spot up guy. He could run the pick and roll. He can do some different things and kind of not necessarily a combo guard setup, but if you want to have Anthony Edwards run pick and roll, sure, Monte can stand in the corner or stand on the wing and be a secondary creator if need to. There's no doubt about that. So I think this is a really good move, man. I think you guys are going to love him.
Real confident knockdown, confidence in the competence of his knockdown catch and shoot ability. I mean, that year was 39%, but if you look at the years before and afterwards, he's right around that 39% number. I mean, almost exactly 39% every year of his career. The volume is kind of, again, for Wolves listeners, it was 5 threes per 36 minutes. You can kind of picture that somewhere between Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker volume. Jaden's about 4 per 36. Nickeil is about 6. So that's not high volume, but that's definitely a guy that's going to take them. And then, the turnover rate is the glimmering stat in that 21-22 season. Again, when he was in a starter's role, he led the league, as in he had the lowest turnover rate amongst all point guards, according to Cleaning the Glass. Mike Conley, right there below him, he was 5th on that board. It does sound a lot like discount Mike Conley. I don't mean that in a negative way, but
that's how it is. It's also we've also kind of used the approximate of Tyus Jones as another sort of Monte Morris comparison. And obviously you guys are very familiar with Tyus. He's had some good moments with Minnesota, with Memphis, and with other teams as well. So no, there is a market for that, for a smaller point guard who can at least get you into sets into the playoffs. The offense is not going to be a problem with him out there as long as he fits in and understands what the team wants to do. Okay. If he can kind of take on what Mike Conley has done in sort of shaping what's supposed to happen out there, then I don't see like this is a match made in heaven for a bench point guard situation.
Perfect. Assist numbers were bad that season. Is that just a playing with Jokic thing? Like only somebody
in terms of the 2021-22 season?
Yeah. Just had low assist numbers for a point guard. I just marked down. I'm like, I don't know. Is that
so Jokic? Like one of the things that Denver has always kind of struggled with is they will set the ball up to Jokic and then they will run some of their offense as well. So I don't see him as this, he's not Chris Paul out there in terms of finding the right pass off the dribble every single time. He is a little bit he's not a great athlete. He is not somebody who's going to use a bunch of quickness and a bunch of physicality in order to get to the spots to create some of those open opportunities for teammates. They're going to have to be within a system. They're going to have to be within a read for sure. But I do think that he is a good passer. He has always been a good passer. He's an accurate passer, but he also doesn't take a ton of chances, which is why some of those other assist numbers will probably be a little bit down.
And that's very, as Wolves fans remember, that was the Tyus Jones thing in Minnesota. We would always, not always, but you would kind of okay, your assist to turnover ratio is so low or so high in a good way because Tyus would not do risky passes. And if he would get downhill, he would just shoot a floater rather than, make a lob pass or kick out pass or something like that. And he wasn't very good at those floaters because they were kind of like bailouts at that point. Obviously Tyus got a lot better at that, but I think that's a good, probably again, for Minnesota fans who have seen a lot more of Tyus than they have Monte Morris, that archetype. Of
also just kind of it divides what a starter versus a backup is in this league, in my opinion, where a starter will be willing to take more of those chances. They will be a little bit more aggressive in some of those situations. I would never describe Monte Morris as an aggressive player. He's going to be a guy who finds the right pace at the right time and is going to go no more or no less than that particular pace. And that's going to be good for a team like Minnesota that has all these other guys that can create. There's no doubt about that. And you're not going to want them to carry a bunch of the scoring or anything. But part of the reason, like he is a traditional point guard in a world where the traditional point guard has mostly gone to die. So it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. But because Mike Conley's already on the roster, like I don't see any
they
reason.
need that. They want that. You know, it is the unique team that is craving the old school point guard, at least for now, and how this team is currently coached and constructed. They need more of that. They don't need the point guard position to be a high usage, you know, you got Anthony Edwards, you got Karl Anthony Towns, you've got Naz Reid off the bench. You have, well, this hasn't been a great offensive game. You don't necessarily need the point guard position to be where you're juicing that offense in any way other than don't mess it up, right? Don't be the turnover guy. Don't be the bad decision guy. And if nothing else, it sounds like that's for sure something they're getting in Monte Morris. Again, and I'm clearly just doing the thing where I looked at the numbers and I'm asking you questions.
Oh, sure.
But surprised me how good his numbers were, both from the mid-range and at the rim. Not only just in Denver, also in Washington a year ago there too. I guess. I mean, I watched Denver play then, and I can picture Monte Morris coming in for taking a mid-range jumper type point guard, like he's going to get into the middle of the floor. There's nothing there, take it. But you know, close to 50% from mid-range, short, long, whatever, kind of 48 to 50% there. That's a really good number. And then at the rim was like 68 to 70% in the last few years, which is elite for a point guard.
He's fundamentally sound. He's very fundamentally sound and very crafty around the rim, where he's got a variety of different finishes. You mentioned the floater that Tyus Jones has. Monte has always had a very good floater as well. I wouldn't expect him to go to it a ton. I think he's more of a kind of a pull up to kind of shooter instead.
Sure.
But there is certainly a market for that. And I think one of the things that does is it will pair well with Naz Reid. It will pair well with somebody who can pick and pop, somebody who like is athletic enough to also be a pick and roll guy. And as long as there's enough space to operate and to do that, Monte will be able to operate within that space, and he'll set up the guys really, really well. That is a really, really important skill set that he will bring to the table. And the finishing, like teams will dare him to beat them. And he hasn't been in a situation these last couple of years where it's really shined through and that he has to do that. Sure. Obviously he's been injured for much of this year with Detroit, but I firmly believe in him, man. Like I think that he's a player that Nuggets fans would love to have back if it means anything.
Did he have you said the Naz Reid thing. Did he have like a guy like that off the bench with him, like his, you know, second unit part? I mean, I know obviously he started that Jokic year, but is there sometimes I think about that, is there a specific type of player that a point guard accentuates most? I mean, and you
the one that
Naz Reid, but
yeah, the one that really paired well with him for a long time was Mason Plumlee. And that's where when Monte came into the league, he was a G League guy initially, only played 3 games his first year. Then he played every game for the next couple of seasons next to Mason Plumlee, and those guys would set the table for each other. Mason Plumlee, think of like the C tier version of what Jokic was doing at that time, and
a little bit of somebody making big kind of too.
Yeah, but somebody who could create off the dribble for himself and others a little bit. Somebody who was passing out of the post, out of the elbow, things like that, and they'd run DHO, and he would get downhill and he'd throw lobs to Mason, who would reverse dunk it all the time. And there are a lot of moments where like Monte loves to be able to get to those points, but he's also a pretty safe finisher. So if Naz is open, he'll hit him, like whether it's on the perimeter or rolling to the rim for a massive jam, which I know Naz does plenty.
Or Rudy too. I mean,
Rudy. Yeah, no, that'll be like, I know that the T-Wolves love to stagger their guys in a lot of different combinations. And like, I can see him working well and finding pick and pops with Towns. I can see him lobbing over the top to Rudy, and I can see him kind of playing the in-between game with Naz. Like both of those, like all 3 of those guys, like there's no pick and roll pass or DHO pass that he doesn't really have in his bag, if that makes sense.
Ryan, this is This is awesome. This is going to be so helpful for myself, and I would assume for listeners as well. Let's talk about the defense a little bit. What does he lack defensively outside of size?
Yeah, the size is always going to be a big thing, and that's something that will be very prevalent in a playoff matchup for sure. Athleticism is where he's probably lacking the most, the length and athleticism components, where usually in those situations you'll be able to make up for a lack of size with, hey, you get your hands on and balls in passing lanes, you'll be able to pick somebody's pocket. He doesn't really do as much of that. His steal rates and block, like certainly no block rate, but his steal rates are definitely not like awesome, especially as he's gotten later into his career. I wonder if being in a situation, a very competitive situation, that he would be a little bit more engaged on that end. He can run a scheme, and there's no doubt about that. That if you've got and Minnesota's got the best rim protecting scene in the league right now, so there's plenty that they can throw out there.
But they play up in coverage sometimes too. I mean, it was the Wolves largely mirrored that Denver system of putting Jokic up in coverage. I mean, but the year before they had Gobert, that was Towns all the time. And if you looked at the Wolves defense, and that was the 21-22 season, if you said there's one that's most similar to the Wolves, it's what Denver was doing when Monte Morris. And that's not their foundation defense with Rudy, because obviously you're going to be a drop team. But they do send Nas, send Cat up in coverage all the time. And, it helps as the guard, the point of attack guy, to have experience playing in that sort of coverage, because it's different than locking and trail, or to following for the rear view contest and all those sort of things. So I think that, just thinking out loud, that's probably a valuable thing, as I could picture him playing in second units often, where, it's Cat or Nas as the pick and roll coverage big, where they might adjust coverages accordingly there. And then Rudy sometimes too, you're playing Luka Doncic or somebody like that, also need to be up in coverage there too. So I guess even if he's not physically a gifted defender or doesn't have good, these aren't like the Bones Highland numbers, which also you could in terms of defense. He's a clear step up from that, but still the defensive estimated plus minus is below average.
What I will say is that you can obviously win a championship with him as your worst defensive player in your rotation. Like there's no doubt in my mind that you can do that. And with the personnel that Minnesota has to kind of bolster that, one of the things that Denver didn't have in that 2021-22 season around him was great defensive personnel, where a lot of times they're relying on Austin Rivers off the bench or Aaron Gordon guarding point guards. And that's one thing, is that you probably won't find Monte Morris guarding the lead ball handler for the opposing team all that often. The great news in Minnesota is you've got plenty of guys who can do that. Right. You've got Jaden McDaniels, who specializes at that, and you've got Anthony Edwards, obviously, who if tasked with it, he can certainly do that, and Na as well. So there are plenty of rotations and mixing and matching of defensive personnel that he could fit in perfectly fine with. And he's also going to, like, if there is an available steal, he will go get it. He will this is not going to be a situation where he's not willing to do the things. He's a competitor. He wants to be a good, helpful defensive player. There's just certain physical limitations.
Yep. That makes sense. That's what I would have kind of guessed there. And I mean, I've just been thinking about that a lot recently, honestly, more so through the Bones or that type of player lens for this team. It really is a market inefficiency that the Wolves can capitalize on in being able to, whether it's at, the deadline tomorrow or even into next offseason, they're the team that probably can absorb a close to zero defender, particularly if it's off the bench. And you just kind of like think about that again through the lens of, to some team, getting awesome offensive player, bad defensive player, that's a different price point for them, because they have to factor that in completely different. And I think, for the Wolves with Morris here, kind of, but even bigger picture going forward, like, I think they're going to be able to buy those players, or maybe if it's even signing them whenever. I've got a lot of money going forward, but there will be signings
Also,
down the line.
The buyout
Yeah.
is also an option there for sure. And like, I'm sure that's certainly come up in your conversations for sure.
Like McDermott, we talked about McDermott, as a potential buyout candidate. And it's like, okay, awesome. This is the movement shooter, but it's he's going to really cost you defensively. I don't think I'm that concerned about it, particularly when I hear from someone that it's not an effort issue. It's not a thinking issue. It's a physical limitation issue. And I think with Monte Morris, it seems to be that. And a lot of those other like Doug McDermott type offensive players lack there. You want the defensive poor players to be able to know what they're doing, even if they can't physically execute it. And I don't think Morris is even all the way down there, but I don't have a real big concern, particularly when it's, coming up against the second unit. Like, yeah, if you had to close a game, if you chose to close a game with Monte Morris, because maybe all of a sudden you love the Mike Conley, Monte Morris double point guard look. Well, then we know what it's going to look like. They're going to attack that.
Yeah.
And just like they attacked Cat last night, like that's what teams are going to do, particularly in the. Did that happen? Did Monte? Do you feel like Monte got attacked defensively in the playoffs that year?
I think there are certain matchups where it becomes a little bit more prevalent. I think a Phoenix series is one where Devin Booker and maybe even Bradley Beal would probably go at that pretty strongly. Just guards that feel like they can get to a spot and pull up over him will probably be an issue. The good news is that there are a lot of guards, obviously, but if you're working so hard to try to get that mismatch every single time, then it actually takes you out of your offense. It's something that like teams like Phoenix have found out for sure. So what I will say is that like later into a playoff series, you get these marginal guys that are like, that have these more weaknesses, and later into a playoffs, it kind of like closes up where some of those guys aren't going to be able to play. Like, I don't know how much Monte Morris is going to be able to play in a conference finals or a finals. But that is also a great problem to have for your 9th or 10th man.
Yeah, no, it exactly. I think he needs to be passable for a backup role. That's what the role is here. And honestly, I'm not even sure how big this role is going to be. Like, Jordan McLaughlin has been backup point guard now, and he gets kind of like 2 5-minute game, and sometimes doesn't even get the one in the second half. So, I mean, bigger picture, and I need to think about this more. Like, I'm just curious how much they're going to play Monte Morris and whose minutes in addition. We know he's going to replace the McLaughlin minutes, but I think if he is healthy, able to do these things, you're going to want to expand that out to the same size role or similar size role to Nickeil Alexander-Walker or Naz Reid, and we'll have to see if that means Kyle Anderson maybe falls out of the rotation or what it can be. He can at least, Kyle Anderson plays some point guard every night, and I think we can at least get rid of those minutes. Give him all the J-Mac backup point guard minutes. Not that it's a big pile. Give him that. Give him the Kyle Anderson backup point guard minutes. I think we got 15 minutes a night there. And then if he earns something more, it probably comes at the cost of Kyle Anderson minutes. Ryan, this was, again, really awesome, really helpful for me, saved me some time. I am going to still go watch a little bit of Morris in Denver from that year later this evening. But seriously, thank you so much, everyone.
Of course,
follow Ryan. What year are you? Blackburn NBA on Twitter? Is that what
it's at NBA Blackburn?
At NBA Blackburn. We all throw the NBAs in our.
Yeah, you know what? I just thought, you know what? I'm covering the NBA, so here we go. That's perfectly fine.
Yes.
Also, Ryan Blackburn was taken by some bot from like 2009 that had never tweeted once back in 2009 and then never relinquished it. So I could never get my full name.
Well, NBA Blackburn's cool, man. And you are doing the alley-oop, which is will you just tell people about what the alley-oop is? I am the Timberwolves contributor.
Yes, you are
on the alley-oop, but you're covering all 30 teams with that.
Yeah, so the premise of it was to cover all NBA teams equitably, and for a smaller or mid-market team like a Minnesota, where you often have to listen to Lakers coverage and Warriors coverage and Celtics coverage all the time. It's nice to be known that your team is going to get a fair shake. So I was very glad to get Dane onto the podcast for the Timberwolves side of things. And she just try to get a whole bunch of beat writers and analysts from all these other teams to share their excellent insights on the NBA. So it's the Alley-Oop with Ryan Blackburn, wherever you get podcasts or on YouTube.
And then Ryan also covers the Denver Nuggets for his full-time job. That's as you were saying at the beginning, we have a lot of I don't know, Minnesota Denver incest here.
Yeah,
over the years, and Monte Morris being the most recent. So Ryan does great.
I'm waiting for you guys to go get Bones too. Like that's we'll see.
I wouldn't rule it out. It's like 6 p.m. Here Central Time on Wednesday. Yeah, today's Wednesday. Yeah. Deadline tomorrow. We'll see. No, I mean I saw Tim. It was when they played the Clippers. Tim's not normally there like before the game for warmups, but he was there. And he was sitting with Bones. He was sitting with Plumlee, and people like, "Oh, Tim Conley's sitting by Bones Island." And like, you also got to remember they're just they're former coworkers. Like that might be a reason to be I don't know, a meeting of the minds. But we'll see. Maybe Bones Highland, and if Bones Highland comes through, I don't know if I'll get you on the pod, but I'm sure I'll call you or text you to ask you more questions. This again was great. Following Ryan on Twitter at NBA Blackburn and listening to his NBA pod, the Alley-Oop with Ryan Blackburn, and then the Nuggets podcast is Pickaxe and Roll, correct?
Yep, that's the one.
Awesome. Thanks to Ryan. I will, next episode. Now, as I said, this episode will be on Friday after the deadline, but we squeezed this one in here. We're going to have the Wolves playing the Bucks tomorrow night. If some other trade goes down, we will record that on Friday after the game as well. Britt and I will talk both about the Bucks game and we'll get Britt's take on this Monte Morris deal as well. Until then, he's Ryan. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Grinning hard so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.